She looked me dead in the eye, my best friend of 10 years, and she said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. She said I owed her everything I had, my career connections. And then she paused, tilted her head, and added my boyfriend to that list. I remember the room going very quiet inside my head. Not the kind of quiet that comes from shock. The kind that comes when something you have been half suspecting for years finally walks through the front door and takes a seat at the table. I had been underestimating how far she would go. I had been telling myself she was just intense, just passionate, just loyal in a complicated way. I was wrong about all of it. And what I am about to tell you is the story of how I finally stopped being wrong. My name is not important. What is important is that I was 24 years old. I had a job I had worked incredibly hard to get, a one-bedroom apartment I paid for myself, and a boyfriend named Daniel who was kind and steady and genuinely good to me. I also had a best friend named Cassidy, and I had known her since we were 14. Cassidy and I met the first week of high school. I was new to the district, awkward in the specific way that only a 14-year-old who has just moved cities can be, unsure of every social signal, dressed slightly wrong, laughing a half-second too late at jokes. Cassidy found me at lunch on day 3. She sat down across from me, looked me over with these sharp, dark eyes, and said, "You need to sit with me, or this year is going to destroy you." I thought she was being kind. Looking back, I think she was identifying someone she could shape. She was magnetic. She was loud and funny and fearless, in a way I genuinely admired. She introduced me to her friend group. She coached me on which teachers to avoid, which parties mattered, how to dress. When a group of older girls started targeting me in junior year, the kind of low-grade social cruelty that feels catastrophic at 16, Cassidy stepped in. She confronted them publicly. She made it stop. I was so grateful I could have cried. I did cry, actually, in her car afterward. And she held my hand and said, "I will always protect you." That is what I do. What I did not understand then was that she was also filing that moment away. She was keeping a ledger. Through college we stayed close, even though we went to different schools. She called constantly. She had opinions about every decision I made, my major, my internships, the people I dated. I thought that was just how close friendships worked. My therapist, years later, would use a different word for it: control. After graduation, I landed a marketing coordinator role at a mid-sized firm in the city. It was not glamorous, but it was mine. I found my apartment through a coworker. I furnished it slowly, piece by piece, with money I had earned. I started building something that felt genuinely like my own life. Cassidy moved to the same city 6 months after I did. She said it was because the job market was better there. She moved into a place 3 blocks from mine. I told myself that was a coincidence, or at least I tried to. I met Daniel at a work event about 8 months into living in the city. He was a friend of a colleague, quiet and warm, the kind of person who actually listens when you talk. We dated for 5 months before I introduced him to Cassidy. I was nervous about it in a way I could not fully explain at the time. I kept telling myself I was just being protective of something new. The first dinner the 3 of us had together, Cassidy was charming. She was funny, she was engaged, she asked Daniel thoughtful questions. On the walk home, she told me he was fine. That word delivered flatly, like a grade just below passing. I asked what she meant. She shrugged and said, "He seems a little ordinary for you." I let it go. I should not have let it go. Over the next few months, I noticed Cassidy texting Daniel directly. She said she was just being friendly, making him feel welcome in our circle. She started suggesting group hangouts that were really just the 3 of us. She started touching his arm when she laughed. She started finding reasons to be wherever he was. Daniel mentioned once, casually, that Cassidy had texted him asking for restaurant recommendations for a date she was supposedly going on. He seemed slightly uncomfortable about it. I filed that away and said nothing, because I was still in the stage where I was explaining everything away. That stage was about to end. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday evening at Cassidy's apartment. We had been having one of our regular dinners, just the 2 of us, and I had made the mistake of mentioning that my firm was sending me to a 3-day conference and that Daniel and I were thinking of turning it into a long weekend trip. Something shifted in her face. It was subtle, but I had known her for 10 years and I caught it. She set down her fork. She said, "I actually wanted to talk to you about Daniel." I said, "Okay." She said she thought I was getting too serious too fast. She said Daniel was pulling me away from the people who had always been there for me. And then she said it, the sentence that cracked everything open. "You would not even have the confidence to be with someone like him if it were not for me. Everything you have because I helped you become someone worth having it. And I think you have forgotten that." I sat there for a moment, very still. I asked her to say that again. She said it again, more slowly, like she was explaining something to someone who was not quite keeping up. She said she had invested a decade in me. She said the way I carried myself, the way I talked to people, the way I had learned to navigate the world. That was her work. And she said that if she decided she wanted Daniel, I should understand why that was something she was entitled to consider. Not pursue, consider. Like he was an item on a shared account she had not gotten around to claiming yet. I did not explode. I said very calmly that I needed to go home and think, and I left. On the walk home, something cold and clear settled into my chest. Because here's the thing about hearing something outrageous stated plainly. It has a way of making you suddenly see everything that came before it in a completely different light. Every time she had undermined a relationship I was in, every time she had made me feel like I was lucky, she kept me around. Every time she had inserted herself between me and something that was mine. I did not call Daniel that night. I needed to think without anyone else's reaction shaping mine. I spent 2 days going back through things, not obsessively, clearly and methodically. I looked at the text thread between Cassidy and Daniel on my phone, the messages I had seen in passing and not examined. I asked Daniel, directly and calmly, whether anything had happened between them, or whether Cassidy had said anything to him that he had not told me. He was quiet for a moment too long. He told me that Cassidy had kissed him at a group event 3 weeks earlier. He said he had pulled back. He said he had told her it was not going to happen. He said he had not told me because he did not want to cause drama and he thought it was a one-time thing that was already resolved. I want to be honest about this part. I was not screaming. I was not throwing things. I felt something much quieter and much more final than anger. I felt the specific grief of realizing that 2 people you trusted had both, in their own way, decided that managing the situation was more important than being honest with you. Daniel's version of events was that he had done the right thing by stopping it, and maybe in a narrow sense he had. But he had also looked at me every day for 3 weeks and said nothing. He had let me keep trusting Cassidy. He had let me keep being in the dark, while he held information that was mine to have. That was not someone who had my back. That was someone who had prioritized his own comfort over my right to know what was happening in my own life. I told him I needed space. I told him I was not ready to make a decision that night, but that I needed him to give me room to think. He looked genuinely remorseful, which I noted and set aside. Then I called Cassidy. I told her I knew about the kiss. I did not tell her how I knew. I just said I knew, and I asked her to tell me the truth about what had been going on. She did not apologize. She did not stumble or backtrack. She said, "I told you I was considering it. I was seeing if there was something there. I was not going to hide that from you forever." I said, "You are hiding it right now." She said, "I was waiting for the right time." And then she said the thing that I think she had been building toward for years. She said, "You have always needed me more than I have needed you. I think deep down you know that. And I think that is why this is so hard for you. Here is what I want you to understand about what came next. I did not immediately become a person who had everything figured out. I did not have a triumphant moment where I delivered a perfect speech and walked away glowing. What I had was a very quiet, very deliberate process of choosing myself, and it was harder than any dramatic confrontation would have been. I ended things with Daniel, not because I thought he was a monster, but because I realized that his instinct, when something difficult happened, was to protect the peace rather than protect me. I needed someone whose first loyalty was to our relationship, and he had shown me clearly that he was not that person yet. Maybe he would be for someone else someday. He was not that person for me. I blocked Cassidy on everything. Phone, social media, email. I did not send a long message. I did not explain myself. I had already explained myself on that phone call, and she had responded by telling me I was too weak to handle the truth. There was nothing left to say to someone who saw my pain as evidence of my inferiority. What I did instead was get very quiet and very intentional. I found a therapist. This was not glamorous. The first few sessions, I mostly just talked in circles, trying to explain the situation, and my therapist kept gently redirecting me away from Cassidy's behavior and back toward my own patterns. She asked me when I had first learned that love was something you had to earn by being useful. She asked me when I had started believing that I needed someone to vouch for my worth before I was allowed to claim it. I did not have great answers, but I started looking for them. I want to tell you about something my therapist said in our 4th session that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, "The people who tell you that you owe them your success are almost always the people who are most afraid of what you would become without them." I turned that over for a long time. Because here is what Cassidy had actually seen 10 years ago, when she sat down across from me at that lunch table. She had not seen someone who needed saving. She had seen someone with potential, someone who, with the right environment, would grow into someone confident and capable and worth knowing. And she had decided, at 14, to position herself as the source of that growth, so that she could always hold the credit. Every time I succeeded, she could say she made me. Every time I had something good, she could tell herself it was really hers. My life had been her long-term investment, and she had come to collect. Understanding that did not make me angry. It made me sad for her, and it made me determined. I started doing things differently. I said yes to opportunities I would have previously checked with Cassidy before accepting. I made new friends without auditing them through her opinion first. I started trusting my own read on people. I started noticing how often my gut had been right about things I had overridden, because Cassidy had a different interpretation. I got a promotion at work. Not a huge one, but a real one, with a title change and a raise that let me breathe a little easier. I did that on my own, with my own work, and there was no one in my life to hand the credit to. That felt important in a way I had not expected. About 4 months after I cut Cassidy off, a mutual friend reached out to me. She said she wanted me to know that Cassidy had been telling people in our old friend group that I had ended our friendship because I was jealous of her, and that I had always been unstable and difficult to be close to. I thanked her for telling me. I did not rush to defend myself. I did not send a group message with my side of the story. I just noted it and moved on. Because here is what I had learned. The truth does not need a publicist. People who have actually spent time around you know who you are. And the people who were willing to believe Cassidy's version, without question, were people who had never really been paying attention to me anyway. I want to be careful about the word revenge here, because what happened was not something I engineered. It was something that unfolded, because Cassidy had always been this way, and eventually the people around her started to see it. About 6 months after our falling out, I heard through the mutual friend that Cassidy had done the same thing to another woman in our extended circle, inserted herself into a relationship, made a move on the woman's partner, and then, when confronted, told the woman she should be grateful for everything Cassidy had done for her. Same script, same logic, same ledger. The difference was that this time there was a whole group of people watching, and several of them had already heard Cassidy's version of what had happened with me. And when they saw the pattern repeat itself, the narrative flipped. I did not say, "I told you so." I did not resurface to make the moment about me. I just kept living my life, and the truth of who Cassidy was reached the people who needed to see it without any help from me. Cassidy lost most of her social circle in the city over the following year. I heard she moved back to our hometown. I heard things were not going well for her. I felt something when I heard that. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of sober recognition. When you spend years building your identity on the diminishment of other people, you do not have much left when the people stop tolerating it. Daniel, for what it is worth, sent me a long message about 8 months after we ended things. He said he had been in therapy, and that he understood now why staying silent had been a form of betrayal. He said he was not asking for anything, just wanted me to know he was sorry. I appreciated that. I wrote back something brief and kind. I wished him well and I meant it. I did not get back together with him. That chapter was closed, and I had no desire to reopen it. But I was glad he had done the work. It made it easier to carry the memory of that relationship without bitterness. I want to tell you about who I am now, not to perform a transformation, but because I think it is the most honest part of this story. I am 26. I have a therapist I trust, and a friend group I chose carefully, and who chose me back with equal care. I have a job I am genuinely proud of. I have an apartment that feels like mine, in every corner. I wake up most mornings without the low-level anxiety that I used to think was just a personality trait, the constant checking of myself against someone else's approval, the background hum of wondering whether I was grateful enough, whether I was being too much, whether I was allowed to want the things I wanted. That anxiety was not my personality. It was a symptom. It was what happens when you spend a decade being slowly taught that your worth is contingent on someone else's generosity. Think about 14-year-old me sometimes. The girl at the lunch table, who was so relieved that someone sat down. I do not blame her for being grateful. She was doing the best she could with what she understood. But I wish someone had told her earlier that kindness with a ledger attached is not kindness. That protection offered as a down payment on future debt is not friendship. That you do not owe anyone your life because they were decent to you during a hard time. You are allowed to be grateful without being owned. You are allowed to grow without giving someone else the credit. You are allowed to love people, and then, when they show you who they really are, let that love change shape into something more like clarity. The hardest part of all of this was not the confrontation. It was not the breakup. It was not even the loneliness of the first few months after I cut Cassidy off, when I would reach for my phone to text her about something and then remember. The hardest part was unlearning the belief that I needed permission to take up space in my own life. I earned everything I have, not because Cassidy taught me how to walk through the world, but because I was always the one doing the walking. She just convinced me, for a very long time, that she was the ground beneath my feet. She was not. She never was. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you have someone in your life who keeps a running tab of everything they have ever done for you, who makes you feel like your success is really their success, who positions themselves as the reason you are worth anything at all, I want you to hear this clearly. You do not owe anyone your joy. You do not owe anyone your relationship. You do not owe anyone a seat at the table of your own life just because they were there when the table was being built. Gratitude is beautiful, and only one of those things was ever real. If this story hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you are in the middle of your own quiet rebuilding right now, keep going. The version of you on the other side of this is already waiting. She is not asking for anyone's permission.